Definitely a very unique experience, but something that I was also really looking forward to experiencing, because I think that editors and curators are constantly in conversation with artists and not in conversation much with each other. And because editing is quite a intuitive craft. It does not have a legacy of sort of a written or documented history, or a very or a history that's very that can be defined, a definitive history. So it's a lot of it is learning by doing. So I have learned, I think what I know about editing is through what I have learned through my practice. So it was quite enriching to see that somebody else's practice so up close, and then to find the resonances across our ways of working. I also feel that Cécile and I are we turned out to be quite similar in many ways. We are both people who are sort of first responders to artists. We often propose the first edits, which is the starting point. We are both people who really believe in learning about an artist's entire archive in relation to that work, so that we can understand their process, their psyche, their motivations, intentions, which is beyond what the edit will be. So a lot of those sort of working practices are very similar, and we were both quite surprised, because right from the point of selection of artists to the individual edits, it was something that, like, the resonance was very clear. So yeah, it was a big learning for me, and I think that to see someone else as a colleague's practice up close is really quite a privilege that we don't have otherwise in our working space. This workshop was actually taking place at my home/studio, and it's something that we have been discussing amongst the participants, the impact that a space makes to the kind of interactions or the relationships that develop over a period of time. I think since a lot of the artists are working with deeply personal works, they're intimate, they're related to family, some are related to trauma, some are related to heritage. There are, of course, other broader themes, but I think the process of editing requires, at the core of it, a vulnerability on the part of the artist to open up beyond what they thought that the work can be defined as. And for that vulnerability to emerge, I think the space really makes a difference. So that was a unique sort of experience for me to try. I also found it very enriching that some of the ways that the artists interacted with each other. For example, Percy saw a great resonance with another artist, Divya, and both of them are actually working on family archives. However, in one there is trauma, and in the other there is the sort of the remembering as sort of an ancestry and an ode to their ancestors. But there are many common threads across both. And in Percy's also, there's a celebration of life. And it was very interesting because she noted that both of them have a recipe in common across both their works, and that's what really connects them. And these sort of dialogues that happened across practices is something that is very special to me, because I think art making is, one thing is about the output that we produce, the books we'll make, but it's, for me, at the core of art making is relationships. So not just with me and the artist, but with them and each other. I think one of the big learnings for me, or sort of looking back at this workshop, but also I've been thinking about this in my own practice, or sort of where I take on the role of an educator. I'm uncomfortable with the word mentor, because I think for me it implies a certain kind of hierarchy, and I really want education to move away maybe from the kind of education that I grew up with, which was more of a sort of a teacher-student approach. And I feel that this workshop gave a chance to actually have conversations amongst us, and an exchange of sort of knowledge both ways. But for me, a big sort of takeaway is that how do you actually enable people to develop an editing practice of their own, rather than for me to impose my edit on their work. And that was really a very interesting process for me to also hold back, because I'm quite used to working with artists and for them to in a sense, consider me a custodian of their archives in some way. They hand over their archives, and then I sort of piece things together, and I make a proposition. Here, I had to hold myself back from making a proposition, but create sort of little provocations so that they could learn how to propose possible beginnings, possible narratives. And I think that is really, that's a skill that you can take back, that is not relevant just to this work, but you can apply it to other bodies of work too. Because if I was to do the edit, or Cécile was to do the edit for them, then it would be very specific to these projects. So this kind of knowledge sharing, it's also learning for me that, like, when do you take a step back, and what are the possible ways of sort of enabling each other, so that we can all actually be, there have to be more editors and curators in this ecosystem. So this may be a step in that direction. It's because it came out of a very ad hoc experimental thinking process. When PSA had approached me to sort of imagine what a photo book publishing space could be, I was quite certain also that I did not want to use the word photo book. It's the title that we proposed was that it's towards a practice of publishing. So it's really about building a sort of way of working. And so the initial vision was to create a book that reflected edits from each photographer's work, but would be one combined book that would be produced at a certain at scale, and to be able to distribute across the country in South Asia, to be able to have a trace of this workshop, the dialogues, the editing process. However, midway, I realized that we are investing so much time and resources, human and financial resources, that I felt that it would be quite meaningful to help the artists towards their artist books. And if we can take a step back and consider what is the real value of that combined book versus really enabling them to make their artist dummies, book dummies, I felt that the latter was something that would be much more meaningful for their practice for them. I really appreciated actually working with PSA, because right from the point of conceiving the program, of figuring out how many phases it should be in, or what should be the output, or that we should midway we change the output. Midway we also expanded the workshop. We will have 3 more months now, which we did not have earlier. They were very extremely flexible with these kind of movements, which actually allows for a praxis to develop also for us, because I think teaching needs to be an evolutionary process. If we have rigid agendas, I think we don't learn from the process that we are in. So yeah, and that change of vision I think has been very valuable, because the artists have had a chance to really go in depth into their work in ways that I think even they were not imagining while signing up. I think having spent this kind of extended time with the participants over Zoom, in person, these very intensive sessions over these 2 weeks, but also having spent time with their work, one is that I now feel attached to the work in a way that I want to see how it grows and travels in the world, and how it sort of takes shape. Cécile and I kind of look at it as birthing 10 babies along with the 10 participants. But I think it's also, if there is a second round, it would be interesting for Cécile and I to reflect on what were logistical parts of the process that we may want to change. But I like the idea of also working with people multiple times. So working with Cécile a second time, because I think when you work with someone a second time, there's already a relationship that is there. This year we were building on something fresh. So you're also being, there is a different dynamic, and I think there's a trust that develops over a period of time. So you can be maybe more risk-taking, you can be more courageous, maybe there can also be friction that you're more comfortable with. I think a lot comes out of sitting in discomfort and friction. So I think there is a possibility of something happening from that as well. Not just the friction, but I think the relationship becoming more complex and more real. So yeah, I'd be happy to do a second round. I think we need some time to reflect back on what worked and what didn't.